Hey everyone, it's 10 Types, and rotation is right around the corner, and it's always super exciting with some big metagame shakeups. And being completely honest, this rotation is huge. Looking at past rotations, we'll quickly go through them. This was the metagame after the past rotation. So we see that, obviously all these decks are theoretically still around. You could play any of these lists here, and some of these decks are good, and some of these decks aren't super good. Looking pre-rotation there, we see that the metagame, Lugia Archeops rotated, and so did Regigigas and lost some, but those are a bit down here. And a lot of these decks here are still good. Looking before that, at the very beginning of that year, or that year starting in like March or April or whatever, with the rotation there, we see that, certainly these decks, we're going quite a bit back, but we see that the metagame here it looks like this, and then going it back before that, it looks relatively similar. Certainly, yes, there are some cards that rotated. This was losing, yeah, the Battle Styles era stuff. So we lost. I mean, yes, Flaffy, but I mean, you look at Lost Zone, you look at Charizard, you look at Gardevoir, Chimpow, these decks didn't rotate, right? And so, yeah, we could look even earlier, but I won't go that far back. But ultimately, looking at the current, no, is it the current standard metagame here, there is a lot of top decks that are rotating. Looking at Phantasmal Flames, because Ascended Heroes in Limitless here, it's a little weird or play Limitless because there are a bunch of tournaments that didn't feature Ascended Heroes because of certain IRL tournaments, or essentially the fact that IRL tournaments had Ascended Heroes delayed because of like accessibility and stuff, and product. And then there are also people prepping for rotation, so the metagame's a bit weird here. Phantasmal Flames, we see, I've talked about, this a bunch, and I stand by it completely. There, yeah, Dragapult, Gholdengo, Charizard, Gardevoir as like top decks. Looking at Ascended Heroes, we see those decks there. Charizard is dropped down some, and Gardevoir as well. And what was the other one? Gholdengo, I guess like dropped a little. I don't know, but we certainly see these decks still being quite good, which are all rotating, right? These are very good decks that are rotating. On the other hand, you have Enzorg, Barnes Grimstall, and Mega Absolbox. These decks have some cards rotating, but looking at the top 10 here, top 9 or whatever, we see that there's a bunch of decks rotating, and we also see decks like Mega Lucario. Mega Lucario is kind of mediocre pre-rotation, right? You can look at its win rate. Win rate is by no means everything here, but it is worth mentioning. And the deck is mostly post-rotation. In fact, this list is almost all post-rotation. There are 3 cards rotating in this list, I believe, which are the two randoms and the Turos, unless I'm missing something. So I imagine this, maybe this person isn't trying to play a pre-rotation list. I suppose Nest Ball doesn't actually get anything that Pokemon wouldn't get, or Fighting Gong wouldn't get there. So it is a deck that survives rotation really well. But of course, Dragapult does as well. And this is the first thing we need to talk about with these decks. I guess I'll quickly look through the other 3 decks here with Zoroark, Marnies, and Mega Absol. I will say Zoroark's play is maybe a little inflated in my opinion. I've said this before, it didn't fully load. Let's refresh. So it got End Zekrom, which is a really nice addition to the deck, allowing it to be quite a bit stronger and perform quite well. But also it's a new card, right? And people like to play new cards. Looking at the metagame, same thing with Munkidori Frostlass. Yes, the deck's decent. I wouldn't say it's a lot better than it has been in the past, but with Mega Frostlass, that is a nice new addition that is more fun. It adds, more depth to the deck, which people enjoy, playing with. And same thing with, as I said, Zoroark there. So I think the numbers are inflated a little because of the new set there. Then we see with Marnies, Marnies is losing Arvin. Marnies is losing Arvin, TM Devo, TM Evo, and those are the main cards, but those are meaningful cards. I've heard a lot of people talk about TM Devo as a big loss, which it definitely is, being essentially a win condition, a way, a way to close out games in a way that can scare your opponent and can make them have to play around something else is very different. And there's not really another way to do that. There are some attacks that devolve, but they're not they're not TM Devo, which is essentially, I mean, not completely free to search, but it's pretty free to search there. So ultimately, you are losing that, and you are losing Iono. Iono is a loss. It's a loss for Dragapult as well, and I'll talk about that some. And I'll talk about Iono actually a bunch in this video. But then looking at the third Darkness deck, which is, again, the third of the top 7 that is not rotating, except for Dragapult, which is separate. Which again, Dragapult is like also played twice as much as, or over twice as much by a meaningful amount as the second deck, which like all these are kind of clumped together, going pretty evenly down. I guess there's a gap like between 12 and 13 a little bit, but I mean, there's a 10% play gap between Dragapult and Zorak. And by the way, if you don't know post rotation, there's like a 20% play gap, or somewhere between 10 and 20, maybe like 15. It is varying a little. Actually, no, I think it's like 20 between Dragapult and the second place deck, which that has alternated between like Raging Bolt and Mega Lucario there. But anyways, with Mega Absol, you are losing again Arven, and you're losing, which I guess is a big deal with Trolley. I personally am not an Arven Precious Trolley player. Precious Trolley, term going second, you can fill your bench, which is nice. That being said, I've said this before, and maybe I'm just bad, or maybe I'm just unlucky, or maybe I just remember the times when it doesn't work. But for some reason, Arven Precious Trolley turn 1 like never seems to work. Either my opponent like goes second, like every game I play with it, or I miss it, or honestly, a lot of the time I get it, but then I already like have all the basics I need to play already. So it's essentially just like a nest ball, which is like sure it's a good card, but like then Pressure Trolley is just as good as like Master Ball, which is not a good card, right? So in fact, it's actually presumably worse there. But anyways, so you are losing that. You are also losing TM Turbo Energize. You can play Mega Autono EX. I think some of my Discord servers said they played that in a tournament, and that was really good. I do think it is a legitimate replacement for TM Turbo Energize on some level, but it has some issues as well. And then you have Penny, which is being lost as well. So there was a bunch of losses to this deck. With Mega Absol, I guess if you haven't been paying attention, there's a major Japanese tournament. Mega Absol did end up winning, but it looks pretty different. We see Team Dragapult EX actually taking a big step up post rotation, with some different things. I wonder if we'll find them here. Not really. There's like Mega Venusaur, but then post rotation, there's also Arboliva. Is this Arboliva? Yeah, okay. So yeah, Arboliva with Ogerpon. The deck I think it's like called Ogerpon Megadium here, which I think is a better description than Arboliva. But people call it Arboliva because Arboliva is like the cool card in it. I talked about it on the podcast with Uncommon Fossil yesterday, which is just a regular video. If you're like, oh, I don't really listen to podcasts, it's essentially a regular video, but a little longer, with Uncommon Fossil there, as I said. But we talked about Arboliva, and I'm not a believer in it. I will say, but I've talked about that some in the past, and I play the deck. And anyways, thinking about Arboliva, but there is grass rising up with Ogerpon really being the center focus of it, with it being the heart of like kind of toolboxy decks. You'll see like Lotus Clefairy EX, Mega Kangaskhan EX, you see Mega Absolute EX, you see Corsair Master Ogerpon EX, you can see Wellspring Master Ogerpon EX. So there's a bunch of different Pokemon you can see there, being made up of this Master Ogerpon EX plus Energy Switch and Crispin there, engine. And Crispin is also being played a lot post-rotation and being a major supporter being played. And a big part of that is because looking at Dragapult in current standard, you look at the supporter lineup and you look at the supporters that are seeing play, and you see Professor's Research being the one that I think is a little underrated. I think it's probably a top 10 card in standard, but maybe not. And so, you can kind of ignore that one if you want. There's obviously Boss's Orders, very good post-rotation. Liz Determination, also very good post-rotation. Boss's Orders and Liz Determination are the main two, but we're also losing Iono and Arven, and Iono and Arven are very good, and there is no research to replace those. If you think like, oh, those are really good, but research is a little behind those, I imagine, well, I'm pretty sure Research is the 5th best supporter. I don't know. There's Crispin. I am definitely, I've said this before, a little lower in Crispin than other people because you need to already kind of be set up to use Crispin. Not in terms of energy, you don't need to be set up, though you might already need 1 energy. Some of them are like 3 energy attackers that you're setting up. But ignoring the energy thing, you need to be set up outside of that, which supporters often help you set up. Boss Orders doesn't help you set up. That's a supporter here that doesn't help you set up. And again, Crispin does get you the energies, but Boss is like super good. And also post rotation, we are losing Counter Catcher. So looking at Dragapult here, obviously Dragapult is going to be super good because we're losing a lot of top decks and good decks. And while Dragapult is losing Iono, there are kind of replacements. It's not like Iono is what makes Dragapult good. It's not like Counter Catcher or either the other comeback card makes Dragapult good. Yes, they do help it out, and it is a deck that can play slower, but it can play powerfully and aggressively because Phantom Dive is good. You can get it out turn 2. It's not absurdly hard to do. It is doable if you kind of commit to it, but you don't have to. You can just get it out turn 3 with Badu, and that's quite easy to do. And then you could also get like some piece of a dust storm lineup and start going after your opponent's bench in a really nasty way that there isn't. I mean, there's some counterplay too. There's Battle Cage, there is Psyduck, and you can also, of course, go after Dragapult EX with Lotus Clefairy EX, which does trade evenly. It could trade negatively as well if you are getting knocked out on the bench with Dragapult spread damage. But then they're also going to be a basic, right? So that's going to be a lot better, and you're easier to pay with your attack cost. Objectively, you don't need the fire, you just need a colorless there. So it's more splashable, but there are, like, the counters to Dragapult are kind of mediocre, and we aren't really getting any soon either. We are getting Patrat, I will mention, which counters Monkidori, which I actually think is good for Dragapult, because Dragapult, I mean, yes, it can run Monkidori, and that is good. I will mention Luminous here. Uh, Actually, I'll just like mention it. I'm not really going to talk about Luminous, Monkidori, and Dragapult because we're losing it. I don't think it changed the deck too much. But like against Dragapult EX, Monkidori is really good for just healing and then also extra damage. It like really makes Dragapult EX feel a lot more underwhelming. And so you can still play Monkidori and the right deck's playing it, but with no Team Turbo Energize and like Mega Absol, you're going to struggle to get the energy on there. And with something like, say, Marty's taking losses, and I guess Ends is still probably fine, but, with some of these decks kind of taking hits, I think Monkidori will be hard to slot in. And, of course, Gardevoir, right? Gardevoir is a deck that Dragapult, you probably don't want to see Gardevoir. Definitely not going to be the best matchup in the game there. And so, looking at Dragapult, it's in a really good position. Again, losing Iono and Countercatcher are something that I want to talk about as well, but because I've talked a lot about Dragapult being super good, and essentially every post-rotation tier list I make, Dragapult's like super broken, right? But with the loss of Iono and Countercatcher, this is something I haven't talked about too much on the channel, but I've talked about some. Iono, okay, I have talked about a good amount, specifically loss of Iono, but I haven't talked about it probably nearly to the level that I need to, because this card is the hand disruption card in the game. Post-rotation, there isn't anything to fill the void, really. I suppose there is Unfair Stamp, which is seeing a lot of play, but Iono, it also smooths out the game. If both people are in a bad spot, then you probably Iono. Maybe you don't, but you probably do, because your opponent could top deck out of it before you get a chance to do anything, and then you're just behind. So generally using Iono is probably good in that situation. And then it actually makes the game better because both players get to play, and that's fun. Yes, some games taking a different dynamic is fun, but being able to play is fun as well. And normally when you sit down to play a game of Pokemon, you expect to be able to, actually play the game. So Iono helps that for both players, and Unfair Stamp does not. It's literally in the name. It's called Unfair Stamp. Like, Unfair Stamp is hand disruption. It's only one time, though, so there's a chance that, with a card like Iono, your opponent could always draw out of it, but then you can just hit them with another one, and hopefully they don't draw out of it that time. Same thing with something like Judge, Harlequin, or Lucian. Those are all other replacements for Iono that are all supporters that are definitely worse. They draw less cards, essentially, technically not necessarily with Lucian, but essentially they're drawing less cards, and then they're also probably disrupting not as well. Maybe not, but they have inconsistencies. Some are literally inconsistencies with coin flips there. But then you also have the fact that I guess Judge isn't an inconsistency. That's like consistent, but it's consistently pretty mediocre, right? Not bad. Judge is a decent card. It's been around a long time and it's seen play and been good, but it's not some amazing, crazy card. Unlike Iono, which is probably the best card in the game. Tell me in the comment section what your thoughts are on that. If you think Iono is the best card in the game in Standard right now, I personally think it is. I don't know. I don't know if I think it is, but it's really close. And then it said you're like replace it with Lilies, except that X are already playing Lilies. Like Dragapult's already playing for Iono for Lilies, so you're gonna replace it with maybe some of the search supporters. Honestly, like all the search supporters work pretty, or not all of them, but like a lot of the best ones, something like Hilda. Actually, maybe not Hilda. You're presumably playing Unfair Stamp, so then you're not running Neo Upper Energy. But like you got Dawn, Brock Scouting, things like that. These supporters are quite good in Dragapult, and so to figure something out, right? And the reason these are good, if you're not familiar, is because essentially it's because of Dracloak, and because you're playing stage twos, right? You have good stage twos, you have good stage ones, you have good basics. Every deck has good basics, essentially, because either the basics themselves are good or like Dreepy, Duskull, these cards are important to get to your evolution, so they're good to have more of them. But then obviously the stage two is important, and you run a different one, so presumably you'll be getting value off of that, and presumably you'll be getting value off the stage one. So anyways, in general, it's going to be quite decent there. Better than in a deck like, say, maybe Charizard. I guess Charizard you got Knocked Owl as well. But I don't know, it slots very well into Dragapult, and Charizard's rotating, right? A deck like Alex can use it decently well as well, but something like maybe Marnie's is not going to use it quite as well. Or Gardevoir, there we go. That's an example of a stage 2 deck that obviously it's rotating, but there isn't a good stage 1. There's Curlia, or I guess there is Jellicent if you're playing that, which is like fine, but you're not getting quite the value there. Anyways, long tangent aside, Dragapult's not really losing too much. And then if you hit Dragapult with Unfair Stamp, they could just draw out of it pretty easily. And the other deck that could draw out of things pretty easily is like Goldengo, though getting hit by Disruption over and over again isn't too good for it. And also Gardevoir like has a lot of its power on board. Charizard generally has a consistency with Pidgeot EX, so there are like these really powerful decks that are rotating. But then like these massive one shots from Goldengo, which is kind of nice, but then you're just gonna be face and pull again. As I said. So with Unfair Stamp though, if you hit your opponent, they are probably kind of cooked, right? Because they only have 3 cards in their hand after they draw, unless they have an engine. But they probably don't, because you can use this as soon as they take your first knockout. So you go in with a Badoo, turn 1, going second. Then they stare at your Badoo, and they're like, I can't really do too much. So I want to knock out the Badoo, right? I at least get to take a prize. Taking prizes is how I win the game, and I want to win the game, right? So I want to knock out the Badoo. It's relatively easy to do. I get an extra card out of it, and it progresses me. Except it like doesn't progress you that much, and they're just gonna get unfair stamped, and that's really bad. Because getting put down to 2, or again like 3, is really bad. And your opponent gets to draw a bunch of cards as well. This is actually the best draw ace spec, because so they don't really draw ace specs. I mean, there's secret box, which is also good. But unfair stamp it's just really really powerful, specifically post rotation. But it could also not work. Like you could unfair stamp your opponent, and you could and yourself, and then draw into like a kind of dead hand with a worse or a worse suite of supporters than you have pre rotation. You're not going to hit that Iono because you're not playing it, so you need to kind of hit the lilies. Otherwise, you're kind of in a lost position. You got like Petrol, which is like fine as well. Another good or like decent supporter. You got Judge. These like all right supporters, but the quality is going to be lower there, so it's going to hurt consistency and make unfair stamp feel worse for yourself to draw. On the other hand, your opponent could luck into exactly what they need, and then you've used your one hand disruption card on disrupting your opponent, and then that's it. Too bad, right? This isn't the only hand disruption card though. As I said, you could be playing something like Judge, and you could search it out with Meowth EX. Meowth EX is a really cool card. I have not played with it, though I've played with similar cards like Lumineon V in the past, which is kind of the same, and it is a liability. They're going to pop onto your bench, and your opponent can then target it down, and with a weaker suite of supports in general, Boss is going to rise up even more, being a really powerful supporter that people are going to be, just jamming to their decks because it's so good, and comparatively it's getting better, right? So Boss is just probably just going to go after the Meowth, and then yeah, it's 2 prizes to give it to your opponent. So benching that can feel a little bad if you don't have the Judge at the time you need it, which you probably don't, because it's probably a 1 of there, unless you're running something like Knocked Out, which you can use to find it, which you can play Dragapult, right? So that's something there. Then losing Counter Catcher as well. Because Unfair Stamp as well isn't really a comeback card. It's just a disruptive card. And Iono is a comeback card. Counter Catcher is not or sorry, so Unfair Stamp isn't a comeback card. Counter Catcher is a comeback card. They can work with Dragapult, so you can be essentially ahead in the game state because of having a more powerful board and being like a tiny bit behind the prizes, and then controlling the game through the use of Counter Catcher and Iono and stuff. Specifically Counter Catcher, you can just be 1 prize down where it like doesn't really matter. But anyways, you got Counter Catcher here, which is generally it is a comeback card in different like say Goldengo, it's a comeback card, right? But ultimately this leaving is comebacks are I don't think they're going to be non-existent. Because I think Dragapult can come back, but I think most decks cannot. You need to be able to burst a bunch of damage onto the board in some way, and you look at the damage decks, and it's also lower. Again, we're losing some of the big one-shotting decks. Goldengo, Gardevoir could do big one-shots as well. I mean, even Charizard can do one-shots. You got Dusknoir to do that, but Dusknoir is a big like sweeping Pokemon as well, essentially wiping people out. It's also a card with a true counter in Psyduck. And when I say a true counter, I mean a true counter. There's almost no counterplay to Psyduck if you're playing Dusknoir because we are losing Klefki, right? You look at Charizard here, you see it's running. Okay, this was not running Klefki. We find one that's not Knocked Owl. Here we what? Okay, well this one is running Klefki. It's running Dragonair. Has anyone played Dragonair? I have not played Dragonair, and I have not seen it in Charizard. That's not what I was expecting to see. I always get sidetracked on these videos when I am just scrolling through Limitless text for like examples. But anyways, tell me in the comment section if you've seen Dragonair in Charizard EX. This is actually like super sick, but also kind of mediocre because by the time you get the energy, which by the way just needs any energy on it, which you can accelerate with Charizard EX because of course it accelerates 3, only needs 2. You can get that free stage 1 search, or sorry, free evolution search every turn, of which you can get like anything in the Dusknoir line or Pidgeot line or maybe the Charizard line, though at that point you're like kind of okay that department. But anyways, that's like super sick, but also kind of surprising. So anyways, with comebacks though, I guess the Briar is also kind of a comeback card, but not exactly. So going to be looking at potentially more linear games that are decided earlier because there's not too much that you can do to slow your opponent down. I do think there are some cool things. I don't know. I mean, you just kind of build your hand, which can be fun, but then what are you doing to slow it down? Nothing, or something that's like kind of mediocre. So the loss of these cards, I think, is a huge deal. I think people are going to be happy to see Goldengo, Gardevoir, and Charizard go. I've definitely heard a lot of people complain about Goldengo. I personally have never been a huge Gardevoir fan. It's a deck that I haven't really played with. I played with some certainly, but I just never really got along with it. I never really got. I feel like Gardevoir. Tell me in the comment section if you're someone who likes Gardevoir. And what other decks do you like? I'd be interested in hearing that. Most of the, for the most part, I know some people who play the deck, but most of those people mostly play Gardevoir, and for whatever reason have like a very different taste of decks than I do. I enjoy Dragapult. I enjoy playing that deck. I enjoy playing Goldengo. I to some extent enjoy playing Charizard. Um, honestly, Gardevoir is probably one of the decks I like the least on this list. Not that I despise it. I think it's bad for the game. Though just a little overpowered, but again, it kind of is good against Pult, right? So that's kind of cool for it, and Pult is good. Even though these win rates like look kind of bad, but trust me, it's a very good deck. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on post rotation if you're looking forward to it or if you're not excited for it. I I'm a YouTuber, right? I love hyping stuff up, and I'm gonna hype this up, and I'm gonna enjoy it as well. I'm not sitting here hyping it up just to hype it up. I'm sitting here hyping it up because I love the Pokemon TCG, and I want other people to love the Pokemon TCG as well. And I love the community and all that good stuff. But I'm a little nervous as well. I come from Ember Power, another Pokemon TCG YouTuber, who was like, "Yeah, this is a little sketchy. This like going into the game at this time." Because we're losing some cool stuff, and getting not too much cool stuff as well, right? I've not talked about really any new cards outside of let me pull it up. Let me pull up Val Zero. Outside of Meowth EX, I will mention there is kind of some hand disruption stuff, or I guess comeback stuff slash hand disruption stuff. It is definitely hand disruption, maybe comeback in special red card, which is a card that it's just a hand disruption card in the late game. It's kind of like a late game Iono, one sided. It's fine. I mean, it's a very good card. Design wise, I think it's fine, though I think it could be annoying. But also Ninja Spinner, Nile Zero. I mean, just in general, the Mega era has had weaker sets than the Scarlet and Violet era. They've been, I think, a little smaller. They've been, I mean, like, I think it really started with Phantasmal Flames just being a really weak set, right? I imagine most people would agree with that. Tell me in the comment section if there's something I'm missing from Phantasmal Flames. It's like, actually really good. I mentioned Dawn, Battle Cage. I mean, Mega Lopunny is a pretty decent card. Mega Diancie. These are certainly like decent cards, but for the best guys in the set, I mean, it feels so underwhelming. Nile Zero has one really nice card and some decent support pieces for some different decks, but ultimately it's not really bringing that much new and exciting to the game. Kevin Fossil and I were talking about Mega Starmie on the podcast, and we talked about it before when it was first released in Japan. It was like popping off. Since then, it's kind of fallen off there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section, but make sure you like the video if you actually do, because enjoy it, because, or even if you don't, I suppose I'd like you to like it, because it really helps support the channel and like shows it to more people, or share it if you really enjoy it, share it with other people, and also subscribe as well. That really helps support me and the channel. It shows YouTube that you enjoy the content. But I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.